Welcome to Bound by Books. I'm sci-fi romance author Tina Moss, and I'm joined today by
Marianne Maria. I write paranormal romantic suspense and paranormal romance and all things that go bump in the night.
That's such a great slogan. And how is your week going, Marianne?
It's going pretty good. Trying to get words in and dealing with branding issues with my name, and also for rebranding and recovering the whole Curse by Blood series. So we're
Mhm.
working on going back and forth with the artist on getting the first book done so that it can set the tone for everything. So that's always the hardest, going back and forth. And I feel like, I could hear the grumbling on the other end of the phone, the email going on, this chick, but it's got
No,
to be
no.
right.
Yeah, exactly. You got to get that first one right, especially for the rest of the series. I
Yep.
I am procrastinating for sure. I have two books that are, I mean, pretty much due, and I am just in complete procrastination mode. But that kind of fits in with what we're talking about today, which is
Yes.
writing faster. So,
I we were chit-chatting before, and I think you and I write the fastest, and we were
mhm.
saying that Danielle is catching up because she's queen of organization and she's got all her
Yes.
ducks in a row where she needs to be. Sherry not so much because she's busy with her day job, and
Hmm.
she just likes to. She's very much a pantster, and I have gone to the dark side of organizing. So Danielle will be very, very happy. But I think, like we were saying before, that old meme about writing being 90% procrastination, 1% inspiration, and 9% panic is,
Yep.
with perspiration is very true, because we've coined the phrase. And go ahead, drum roll, say it.
The hostage deadline.
A hostage
TM.
deadline. Yes. Yep. The hostage deadline. That is very, very true for me. And I think it is for you too.
Oh yeah, and it's ironic because when I was writing at a much slower pace, I was very more methodical about it. Like I have to write this many words a day, I have to write this many words a month. And even at that slower pace, I was so focused on like perfection and making sure that everything was like as clean as it possibly could be that it stunted my writing in a lot of ways. The hostage deadline forces me to kind of break out of that mold because I have to get it done by XYZ date. So therefore, I can't allow myself to nitpick at these things that I would just nitpick at forever. I've told the story on the podcast before. My first book was 17 drafts. My second book was 13 drafts. And now I like one draft, edit, good to go, out the door.
Yeah, yeah, that's basically how I do things. I mean, what I've been doing now is I did do drafts for the book that is being sent through City Owl to Webtoons, and
Mm-hmm.
I did, I think, about probably 9 drafts of that, because I just saved it. I saved it, and then I changed, saved it, and then the next day opened it up, changed the title, and draft one, draft two, draft
Right, right.
three, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could pick up, sort of, God forbid something happens to the book, I at least didn't have to go back to the starting gate again.
That's smart.
Um, but I found little things to help me with hostage deadline. And for those of you trying to figure out hostage deadline, oh my God, that sounds painful. It really is just basically something that happened because when you have a deadline, whether it's a pre-order that you put up, and the date is
Mm-hmm.
something arbitrary in the future, you think, oh, I'll have 3 months to get this done. Let me put it up for pre-order, and I'll start my promo. I have my blurb and I have my cover. I can
Right.
just start this and get it done. And then 4 weeks before you're supposed to upload the final pre-order, you're like, oh my God, I only have a third of this book done. And that's when the hostage part kicks in.
Right.
You're,
It's a
you
hard
know,
deadline that you can't basically you
yes,
cannot move. It must be met or, or else basically.
yes, or
But
else.
before we dig too deep into our own personal processes, I just want to say there is no one way to write faster. If somebody tells you like, oh, I have the secret sauce, I know the way in which you can do this and write faster. That is not the case. There are many courses out there that will teach you different methods, many books. We'll talk about our own personal ways, but in my opinion, learning to write faster is truly about learning what works for you. And
Right.
I think you can try to adapt some of the things that we're going to talk about today to see if they work for you. But really finding your own method and your own ways is going to be the key to getting more words on the page. So
Sure.
with that said, Marianne, how do you write faster?
Well, I am a big fan of notebooks.
Mm,
And what I will do is I will ask myself questions at the very beginning of a story. You know what I mean? I will, um, who is the story about? What's the main problem? Who's the main character? You know, they're not, I'm just throwing them out. They're not in any kind of order, whatever.
sure.
What's the biggest conflict? And then I will start sketching out my ideas for chapter one, my ideas for chapter two, my ideas for chapter three. And from those ideas, they will get fleshed out. Now, when I actually sit down at the computer, you know, on my laptop to start writing, those fleshed out ideas, do they always stay? No, because you know when you're in the groove and you're actually writing, your muse is talking to you, the characters are talking to you, things can go, you know, take a hard left somewhere, and then you're like, okay, what do I do now? But I have found that when if I have something concrete in a notebook in front of me, it's almost like keywords
Mm-hmm.
that will spurn and give birth to an idea, or it'll prompt a memory of something that I had. You know, when I keep these notebooks everywhere. I've got them in my pocketbook. I've got them upstairs on my night table. You know, it's like whenever something is important, I write it down because I am of the age, you know, that ideas are very ethereal and they just kind of flutter away from time to time if I don't write them down. So that's one thing I do.
Mm-hmm.
I also have started using Pacemaker. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you know
I
that
do.
Pacemaker. They have a free version and they have a paid version, but free version allows you to work on two books at a time. And if you know Tina and I, we do that from time to time.
Yes.
We will work on two books at a time. And it helps you keep straight. You put in the word count that you need to hit, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's give or take, and it will tell you, you put in your deadline and it will tell you how many words a day you have to hit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you hit it, it throws confetti for you. You know, it's kind of fun, but it's actually a
Yeah.
visual aid that'll give you whether or not, and if you have a bad day and you can't get the words in, or life throws you a curveball, it will recalculate for you.
Which
So,
is nice.
it
So
keeps
yeah.
you on track,
It has
basically
that
on track.
tracking tool and it also has almost that gamification of it in like, ooh, if I hit my word count, I'm gonna see confetti. You know, it's kind of like that quick serotonin boost.
Yes.
So
So
yeah.
those are my kind of my my first go-to tools.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once you're in the meat of the story, there are other things that I do, and I guess we'll talk about it first. But let's
Right.
turn the question on you. And what do you do
Sure.
when you're first starting a book?
I am very much a thinker when it comes to the initial stage. Like before you're ever putting any words on the page, when I finish a book, I have to kind of like put it aside before I start the next one and just start to like think about it, let ideas percolate from like who are the characters in the next book. Usually I know, especially if I'm writing in series, who the characters are going to be, but kind of really letting go of the last story and getting into the headspace of the new story. So I'll allow myself to daydream before I go to bed at night. I'll be thinking about the characters so that even in my subconscious, if I go to sleep, then maybe I'll have a dream about it and just like really sit with it for a while. I don't go from one book to another very quickly. I need a substantial time in between, which can be like as quick as a week or as much as a couple months. Like right now, I took a much larger break. Um, for various reasons with the company, but now I have two books coming up and I really have been immersing myself in that and just letting my mind kind of play. I think it's for me it's very important to do that. And
I
then once
agree.
yeah, you just like you need the
You need a palate
space.
cleanser.
Yeah, exactly. You need a palate cleanser. That's a good way to put it. And then once I'm ready to get down to business, it's for me, it's more about, okay, I've let all this time pass. I've let the ideas percolate. Let's put everything on the page. And I'll very quickly start to flesh out my characters, my plot points, my conflicts, and then get into the outline. Now, I've mentioned before, but I only outline 6 chapters ahead at a time. I don't like to do a full outline because I like the story to breathe and move. So
I agree.
I know where the ending is, but I won't actually outline the whole thing. So 6 chapters, outline, then get into the nitty gritty of writing, then outline the next 6 and keep going like that.
Danielle had mentioned to me once that when I was kind of picking her brains about the last book that I read. That she's like, okay, I read that I wrote. She was just like, well, is it Act One? Is this what happens in Act Two? What happens in Act
Hmm.
Three? And that's because Danielle has a theater background, so
Right.
that's the way her brain works. She works in terms of
The
how many
3 act
acts.
story structure. Yeah, that's common
Yes.
for a lot of, and
No.
it's also commonly taught in writing programs.
Right. So
Mhm.
I mean, and an act can be as many as depending on how long your book is. It can be anywhere from 5 to 10 chapters, if
Sure.
not more,
Yeah.
depending. And it's usually when there's that aha moment
Mm-hmm.
is when it's act two, that type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I try to do the same thing. Like my notebooks are exactly what you were talking about when you said you were fleshing out. I have to get all my ducks in a row that way first.
Mm-hmm.
Will the ducks move forward or will they move sideways? Who the hell knows? You know what I mean? That's where the fluidity in a story and giving it that space, because I don't outline that far in advance either. I do maybe 4 to 6 chapters as well ahead, because by the time I get to chapter 4, if things have changed, then chapters 5, 5 and 4, 5 and 6, or 5 and 6 don't matter anymore. I'm not going
Right.
to throw them out. I'm not going to throw them out. I'll never throw out anything that I've done, because you never know when you may use it again, or you use portions of it again.
Yeah.
Um, so when I'm in the meat of the story, the way that I keep things going so that I don't get into
What they
a
call the
locked
soggy
loop,
middle. Yeah.
The messy middle, the
Messy
mucky
middle,
middle, like I
soggy
call
middle. Yep.
yeah. Um, I, the way I get sucked into it, and I also have a problem with getting in a locked loop when it comes to minutia. You know what I mean? That I will
Mm-hmm.
I will
Mm-hmm.
rework the same
Yes.
200 words, the same 300 words, like over and over. And before I know it, I haven't written more than maybe an extra 50 words, and
Mm-hmm.
3 days have gone by. And so in order to stop myself from doing that, I have started listening to my stories.
Mm.
I will sit
That's a
on
good
my
tip.
hands, hands up away from the keyboard, sit on them so you can't use them, so that I can't, like, ooh, I gotta change that. Ooh, gotta change that.
Right,
No,
right.
I will plug into the read aloud function,
In
and
Word.
I will let it read back to me, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
put it in a cadence that sounds a little bit more like the reading speed that I want this to go. And I will let it just kind of wash over me, so that I know whether or not the pacing is correct, whether sentences are clunky, what needs to be changed. Ooh, that's good. That type
Mm-hmm.
of, whatever it is. And then from there I move on. And I found that it cuts down on my getting locked into that loop. It really does, where I lose days, and I
Right.
make sure that, so it keeps not only, it only helps me check the pace of the story, it helps me check myself, and that I
Yes.
keep the pace of the writing.
That's
So,
that's a great tip. I had that problem as well when I was writing slower, where part of my issue was I would constantly rework and rework and rework and rework to the point where I wasn't getting new words on the page, which is why I had a slower pace. Which is why I think the hostage deadline helps too, because in the back of your mind, you have that date. You know that you can't keep constantly reading over and reworking your story, or you're not going to hit your mark. And that's just not acceptable to either of us when we're on hostage deadline. So
right.
that I think that motivation of the deadline helps push me out of that mindset, because otherwise, yes, I could very easily rework to death, rework forever. I also found that going from a genre where I was writing longer, just like anywhere from 80,000 to 100,000 words, to a genre where I'm consistently trying to stay under 50K or right at the 50K mark, has changed my mindset about writing as well. Because before, where I was like, okay, I'm going to dig into this subplot, I'm going to have, these characters. It's now like the main bulk of the story is the main storyline, where I can't go into these deep dives of subplots because there's only 50,000 words to do it. I could do that in another book, but I can't really have all of these different grounds. So that's changed my mindset as well. Now I know
Yeah,
you
I mean,
write longer, so how do you keep like from going down a rabbit hole?
well, I mean, I hadn't for a long time. I, like you, went from writing these long novels into writing these shorter, faster, funnier, sexier books,
Mm-hmm.
because that kind of was what certain readership wanted. And I found that in doing so, um, I kind of lost my ability to navigate that mucky middle, to
Mm-hmm.
actually expand on the story because I was so used to having everything happen at a
Quick,
quicker
quick. You're
pace
right.
in the, in the story itself,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't want to lose that because I went back and I read some of my longer books and I thought to myself, oh my God, the plot line is so rich and so, and deeply and deep and entrenched with twists and so forth. And I was just like, I can't do that anymore. I'm old, but it's just like, now I have to. And it's funny because through City Owl, I was able to I had to write a longer book. I had
Mm-hmm.
to. The
The
leap of faith
requirement
had to
for it.
be,
Yeah.
the requirement was a minimum of 70,
Right.
70K, so that's a 20,000 words doesn't seem like a hop, much more than a hop, skip, and a jump, but it is. It could be
It
five
is.
chapters,
Yep. For sure.
at the very minimum. And my work ended up being about 91,000 words because I ended up
Mm-hmm.
cutting an entire scene because it was just fluff. Loved the scene. We'll use it again somewhere, but it didn't move the story forward. So,
Mm-hmm.
we got rid of it. But coming out at 91,000 words, it was like, oh my God. It was like, yeah, I had to really dig deep to get back to that
Flex those
core.
muscles.
Yeah, yeah. And then there was a pain. You said you took a couple of months. I took a month
Yeah.
off. I had, just getting back into writing now. It's like, yeah, had to cleanse the palate a couple of times.
Absolutely. And what you just said just gave me a great idea for a tip is that idea of moving the story forward, right? So one of the ways to write faster is to really think about, okay, is what I'm about to write going to move the story forward? If it's not, does it need to be included? Because a lot of times we as writers are a little self-indulgent in that we come across an idea and we want to include it and we get excited about it and we start writing it. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, wait, this has nothing to do with the story, or this is not moving, the plot forward or the character development, and ends up
Right.
having to go on the ground floor. So if you can step back and look at that from an outside perspective and just think, okay, is this moving the story forward? If the answer is no, this is not the time to write it if you're trying to write fast.
Right. Right. And like I said, never, ever, ever just put something, just don't ever just select it and then just hit backspace or delete and then get rid of
Yeah,
your
no,
words.
take it
Never
and put
do
it
that.
somewhere else, or take the
But
idea
it
down and put it somewhere else. But if you're trying to
right.
write fast, you're not indulgent in that, like, whatever idea came to mind, or whatever, rabbit hole came to mind. We're not diving down the rabbit holes when we're writing fast. We're putting them aside for another day.
The other thing I think is if you have to write something that's quickly or you want to is um if you're going to aim for doing a shorter story like something that is 50K or
Mm-hmm.
less.
Yep.
I think it probably would be best to get into the mindset of making sure that you're seeing that your characters have a history, that they
Mm-hmm.
don't just meet for the first time. You know what I mean? That they have, they may meet for the first time and then find out they have people in common, which will
Mm-hmm.
give you that link, because once that's done, or have it be in a world that you're familiar with in terms of
Mm-hmm.
being able to write, so you don't have to create a world from scratch,
Yeah.
because world building takes a long time,
Oh
and if you
yeah.
don't do it correctly, you're going to forget stuff. I mean, we just handled a different podcast about having a character Bible, so that you don't
Mm-hmm.
forget your characters, not only physical traits but their personality traits and so forth. It's the same thing for worlds. You have to make sure
Yeah.
that you understand what your worlds are, what the rules of your world are,
Right.
and so if you already have one that's already existing, that's
Mm-hmm.
something that can help you write faster too.
Absolutely. And that's such great advice, because when I switched genres from paranormal romance, which I'm actually writing a romance book now for
Oh,
younger
really?
also,
Good for
but
you.
that's besides the point. When I switched mainly to writing sci-fi romance, I thought, oh, well, this is not as big of a leap. These are kind of like tangent genres is what I would call them. But wow, was I unprepared for the amount of world building. And again, my books are shorter in sci-fi romance. So I end up sprinkling details of the world, but I had to know all those details before I ever put word on the page. So my world building process probably took as long, if not longer, than actually writing any of the books. Because
Yeah.
when you're in sci-fi romance, you have to know not just, one world. Essentially, you have to know the entire universe.
Yeah, that's very true. And
Try
yet,
making more rules for the entire universe and see how you do.
but these are all things that once they're done and dusted, you can keep that world. And then from there, it's almost like it's your core. And then from there, think of it like the hub of a wheel, and you have all these spokes that can come off of that world. It's once you put in the work, it can take you anywhere.
This universe is staying forever. If any of my readers are listening, be prepared, because spin-offs here, spin-offs there, but the rules of the universe are staying the same. I am not reinventing the universe. Thank you very much.
Yep.
But having all that backstory and all that world building done beforehand, again, is going to be super helpful for when you're trying to like have the speed when writing. Now, a question for you, Marianne. Have you ever tried dictation?
I have an author friend of mine who used Dragon for a while. And it takes a long time for you to train the program to understand your cadence and your accent and and so forth. And you train it, and then once it's trained, you can do it. But the closest thing that I ever got to that was speaking into my phone, as I'm going for a walk, and you can hear me breathing heavy as I'm trying to sit. But it's only when I'm really in the flow. If I'm in the flow and somebody hasn't broken that flow, I will just grab my phone while the characters are still talking to me and so forth, and I'll just hit the record button, and I will walk and I will talk at the same time. And then I will sit on my bed and I will transcribe everything, and at one point, I think I walked for a half an hour and I recorded for a half an hour, and just that 30 minutes of just dialogue, because I didn't fill in any of the, it wasn't like, well, the light was an amber yellow. And, I didn't go into that. It was just the meat and potatoes of the story, the dialogue. That 30 minutes of dialogue between characters ended up giving birth to 2 chapters. So, wow. I mean, and if the chapters are 2,500 words to 3,000 words a piece, then it shows you 6,000 words for a half hour worth of really concentrated thinking and just verbal diarrhea.
Yeah, because there are some authors who absolutely swear by it and can get more words on the page. I've tried it a few times. I own a Dragon program. I need like the separation between what I'm thinking and the speed of typing to be able to like backspace and erase and go forward again. There's something in that action of actually typing that I find comforting and can go quickly with that I just can't get from dictation. I've tried it several times, but again, if you're trying to write faster, dictation is definitely a way to do it. And there are a lot of authors who use it and love it. So maybe something to test out for our authors.
It depends on how your characters speak to you. You know what I mean? For me, it's almost like I need to be in that same zone that you were talking about for me to channel them, and I mean, and I sound like a new age creep, you know what I mean? But I channel my characters. But I do. It's like you get in the zone and you channel your characters.
But that's your creative process. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And the other thing that helps me is white noise. White noise in the background.
I like white noise too. I do like some white noise. And I can't do music. So many people have playlists that they can do and they listen to music. And that is even if it's instrumental, it's way too distracting for me. I can't do it.
I can do some instrumental music. It depends if it matches the feel of what I'm writing. I can do instrumental music. But what works best for me is a plain old oscillating fan. An oscillating fan in the room that it's just it kind of like all of a sudden you're in like this trance state where the words just flow.
I actually have a noise machine that I use for bed that sounds kind of like an air conditioner. Like I love that sound.
An old-fashioned window air conditioner.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. So I don't use that when I'm writing, although I do really enjoy that sound because now I associate that with going to sleep. So it'll probably just like put me to sleep as I'm trying to write. But I do like that kind of like background noise. I can work in the messy middle of like things going on everywhere. If there's like traffic outside, I live in New York City, so if there's traffic outside and horns honking and my husband has the TV on, I can totally just zone in. It's when I'm like actively listening to something that I prefer it to be white noise. I just can't do the music.
White noise. I mean, it depends on the kind of noise in the house, like that if it's just the normal hustle and bustle of the house and like the and people outside and so forth, noise doesn't bother me. What you just said painted a visual to me. Remember that movie, My Cousin Vinny, where
Yeah, of
he's
course.
like, I get me out of this stinking peace and quiet, and he goes to jail, and he gets a really good night's sleep the first night in jail.
It's so true though. I was out in the country, if I was like upstate New York or something, and it's so much quieter and there's like cricket noise, like the cricket noise will keep me up. I feel like that would be the same thing with writing. I would be too distracted by the quiet.
Yeah, yeah. The oscillating fan works for me. We have I have a Vornado, one of those little mini ones that has like, blow your teeth back, that type of how strong are they. And I put it out in the
Oh, that's
corner of the
funny.
room, and just the sound of that fan, it's like automatically boom in the zone.
That's great.
So
Yeah, so that's, when you're thinking about like your writing space and your writing environment, I would say figure out like what feels good for you. Do you want to have like a certain drink, like a certain tea or coffee or water or whatever? Do you want to have certain sounds around you that help you? Anything that can help you
smells.
associate smells. Oh gosh, scents. So nice to have, different scents that you associate. Anything you could associate with the creative process and kind of have like a
Mhm.
little ritual of doing can help get you in that mindset for writing and writing quickly.
The other thing I could think of is that set yourself a time when you're
Mm,
supposed to write. I mean, we're writers. If you have a day job, you have to do your day job, and then and you find time to write whenever you can find time to write. But if you're lucky enough, like Tina or I, to be able to write, as part of our work,
hmm.
then you set yourself a time so that if you have your day job and you know that you can write from 9 to midnight every night without any interruptions, then treat it like your job, and that's your time, and go and get yourself in your space the way you would, and sit down, and actually that's your writing time, and let the people around you know that you are not to be disturbed unless the house is on fire,
Right.
that type of a thing. I mean, that's the way I did it with my children when they were growing up. It's like, are you bleeding? No. Is that you smell smoke? No. Is there a crazy person at the front door? No. That it can, are you hungry? There's food in the refrigerator, there's food in the pantry. Don't bother me, mama's on deadline, that type
Right.
of a thing. And everybody's like, really, you did that? And I was like, yeah.
No, you do
you
what you
know
got to do. You're a writer. And knowing what your rhythms are too, right? Because
right.
some writers can get up, hit the ground running at 5 a.m. I will never be that writer. I am a night owl. I have been my whole life. I've kidded before that my ideal work hours are when I'm abroad and I can work at night. Because everybody else over here, it's normal time, it's normal, working hour time, and if I'm overseas, I can be on a night schedule, and that has always been more beneficial for me. So for me, I know that my most
Yeah.
creative time is going to be like 9 o'clock at night for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I went to a writer's retreat last year in Italy, and we had writing time and brainstorming time carved out during the day, and then we had our little tours and our little classes and so forth.
Nice.
But we would all have dinner together, the 16 of us every night, and then there would be chit chat, and it's amazing how much creativity comes out of group settings sometimes when you're with like-minded people. And I
Mm-hmm.
was on deadline. That was a hostage deadline in the middle of this writers retreat, and I would go back to my room at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I would write till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning every single night. And
Wow,
I in 5 days I wrote 21,000 words.
that's
you know
awesome.
and it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you throw in everything else I was doing, it is a lot. And
Yeah,
I was able to finish
absolutely.
the book. I was able to finish the book. So I
That's
hope,
awesome.
I don't want to plan for hostage deadlines in the
And no,
future.
I
Nobody
we never
plans.
we never plan for them, and they always just seem to happen anyway. I think that's just we have to accept that is our life, Marianne.
I know that is our lot in life.
I would say
Yeah.
to kind of wrap this up, the one thing that I'm going to keep repeating on is get out of your way and understand that your process is not going to be anybody else's process. It's going to look very different. So figuring out what works for you. So for example, for me, like I said, having seasons of writing where I'm not writing every day. I am not an everyday writer. And when I'm in the writing zone, it is dedicated to that. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it beforehand. I'm using the world that I've already built. I'm doing my outline a little bit at a time, and then I'm going, right, and then I'm I'm going, and I don't have messy first drafts. A lot of people talk about just getting the words down on the page. I'm not that person. I like to
Neither am
edit
I.
as I go. I get
Same.
my editor literally reads behind me like a chapter at a time, and I like to move forward that way. But a lot of courses out there that tell you to write fast will tell you don't do that, just to get it all down. And if I did that, I would be back where I was before, where I kept reworking and reworking. So I learned that that's not my process, and that's not going to work for me.
I tried it, I
Mm-hmm.
tried doing that, just get the words down. And you know what? I got the words down.
And they were
Was there
crap.
was 5,000 or 8,000 words, and then it took me 3 days to whip them into shape.
Yeah,
So
see, exactly.
What's easier? Wasting 3 days reworking 8,000 words, or
Right.
spending really quality time getting 5,000 words written, that 5,000 words that you can
Right.
actually use.
Now, the opposite, if you need to write 100,000 words to get 70,000 words or 50,000, if you need to write more and you need to get that mess down on the page and that works for you and it helps you write faster, go for it. But again, that is a part of being a writer, is really figuring out what's going to work for you. So I hope our writing tips help. I hope that you try them out and see if any of them, work in your process. But if they don't, totally discard them and
Right.
do what works for you.
And what I mentioned before, it's pacemaker.com. Like I said,
Yes.
there's a free version of it. So if you want to try it out before you buy, try before you
Awesome.
buy, you go right ahead and do that. And there are other programs too, but that's the one that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, that's a fun one. And we'll add that to the description link on YouTube. And if we can add it to the podcast links, if you're listening on audio, we'll try to do that too. Otherwise, come check us out on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a comment, tell us what you would like to hear from us. We are always willing to talk about what you would like to discuss. So we'd love to hear from you. All right. I think we did it,
All right.
Marianne.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for joining us. See you next
Bye.
time.
Wait! Before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check us out on our website, boundbybookspodcast.com.